what does it mean when one of the most beautiful places in America also carries one of the deepest scars of poverty and displacement? Honolulu, the capital of Hawaii, is often portrayed as a paradise blue oceans, luxury resorts, and a lifestyle that many Americans can only dream of. Yet beneath this image lies a stark reality, a growing crisis of homelessness that has become impossible to ignore. For years, the islands have carried the highest rates of homelessness per capita in the United States, and Honolulu stands at the center of it all. The story unfolding here is not simply about tents along the beaches or encampments near highways. It is a story about the soul of America, about whether a society as wealthy as ours can allow its citizens to live without shelter. The most recent point-in-time count in 2024 recorded 4,494 homeless individuals on the island of Oʻahu, where Honolulu is located. This represents a 12% increase compared to 2023. For a community that has long struggled with high numbers, such a rise is deeply unsettling. More striking still, nearly 62% of these individuals were unsheltered, sleeping in tents, makeshift encampments, or directly on the streets. That means almost 2 out of every 3 people counted had no roof, no stable bed, no formal place to turn.
I'd say housing crisis, not a lot of people have control over what's going on. It's very high priced here. Hawaii is very hard to catch a living if you're not staying with your family. You don't have really many places to go.
Could be. And in a way, I choose to be out here because it's kind of expensive. I can't afford it.
For many Americans watching these numbers climb, the question lingers: how can a city so famous for wealth, tourism, and beauty also carry this contradiction? Part of the answer lies in the fact that Honolulu's homelessness crisis has been growing steadily since 2010, with the number of people living outdoors nearly doubling over the past decade. It is not an isolated tragedy. It is a mirror of the broader challenge of being homeless in America, where cities across the mainland have faced the same rising tide: Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, and now Honolulu, all part of a larger narrative.
You can't sit and lie on the sidewalk. You used to be able to. You'd wake up in the morning, you'd walk down Waikiki, you'd have to step over bodies, laying all over the sidewalk. That's when they made the law. You can't lay on the sidewalk.
What makes Honolulu unique, however, is the intensity of its crisis. In addition to being one of the most expensive housing markets in the nation, the city faces structural issues that magnify every setback. Shelters are overcrowded. Public services are strained. And despite government efforts to expand temporary housing, the scale of the crisis often overwhelms the available resources. This is not just a matter of a few people falling through the cracks. It is a systemic failure, one that leaves thousands living without the dignity of a home. As the sun sets over Waikiki, tourists return to their hotels, while just a few miles away, families settle into tents for another night without security. The contradiction is so vivid it becomes painful. Can a city sustain such an imbalanced luxury resorts side by side with sprawling encampments without questioning its moral compass? Homelessness in Honolulu does not fall evenly across the population. Some groups are far more exposed to its dangers, shaped by economic hardship, discrimination, and fragile health. The elderly are among the fastest growing segment. In just 1 year, the share of homeless individuals over 60 jumped from 8% to 22%. For older people, once stability is lost, regaining it is nearly impossible. Sleeping outdoors in one's 70s is not only undignified but dangerous. Mr. Tanaka, a 71-year-old former security guard, lost his apartment when rent surpassed his fixed income. Now he sleeps near Ala Moana Beach Park, relying on donated meals. I worked all my life, he says quietly, but here I am. His story captures the collapse of safety nets once thought secure. Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders also bear a disproportionate burden. Generations of inequality and the legacy of colonization have left many families without stable opportunities. Encampments like Pu'ahonua o Waianae, largely Native Hawaiian, embody both resilience and desperation. Leilani, a young mother of 2, moved there after her landlord raised rent by 40%. Within the community, she has found safety and solidarity, but she still dreams of bedrooms for her children and the dignity of a permanent home. Individuals living with disabilities and mental illness face similar struggles. Nearly 62% of Honolulu's homeless report at least one disability, and close to 30% live with severe mental illness. Without stable health care, they cycle between hospitals, shelters, and the streets, not out of choice, but because long-term solutions remain out of reach. Finally, families with children are an increasingly visible face of the crisis. Many live in cars or tents trying to preserve normalcy despite constant instability. For the children themselves, the experience disrupts education, health, and development, leaving scars that may last for years. These stories reveal a painful truth. Homelessness in Honolulu touches the elderly, the indigenous, the disabled, and the young alike. It spreads across the community, forcing us to ask who is truly safe from this crisis, and how many more must fall before meaningful change begins. No discussion of homelessness in Honolulu can ignore the role of substance use. Across America, addiction has been both a cause and a consequence of life on the streets, and Honolulu is no exception. Methamphetamine, heroin, and fentanyl have become central players in the daily reality of many who are unsheltered. For some, substance use contributed directly to their loss of housing through the breakdown of family ties, job loss, or legal troubles. For others, the descent into addiction came after becoming homeless, as drugs offered temporary relief from unbearable stress, trauma, or physical pain. The cycle is relentless. Addiction deepens instability, instability worsens addiction, and each makes recovery harder. Service providers in Honolulu report that fentanyl has escalated the danger, dramatically turning encampments into zones of overdose risk and pushing emergency responders to their limits. The problem is not only medical, but also social. Those who struggle with substance use often face intense stigma, making it harder for them to find shelter beds or access treatment programs. In many cases, policies themselves create barriers with shelters, requiring sobriety as a condition for entry, effectively excluding those who need help the most. What then is the way forward? Across the mainland, Some cities have begun adopting harm reduction approaches, safe use sites, needle exchanges, and medical interventions aimed at reducing immediate harm while opening doors to recovery. Honolulu, with its unique geography and tight-knit communities, faces both challenges and opportunities in this regard. If addiction continues to be treated solely as a criminal or moral failing, the crisis will not only persist but deepen. But if it is approached as a public health issue, one intertwined with homelessness, the city may find a path toward healing. This is not just an issue of policy, it is also a question of compassion. When we talk about the homeless in America, are we willing to see those struggling with addiction as human beings first, as neighbors in need, rather than as problems to be removed? Honolulu's story suggests that the answer to that question will determine the trajectory of the entire crisis. Honolulu's government, like many other American cities, has frequently relied on encampment sweeps to address visible homelessness. These operations are framed as public safety measures aimed at clearing sidewalks, parks, and business districts of tents and makeshift shelters. Yet the lived reality of such actions tells a different story. When city workers and police arrive to dismantle an encampment, they are not merely removing temporary structures. They are dismantling fragile networks of survival. Personal belongings are often lost. Medications are discarded and social ties within the encampment are broken. Critics argue that sweeps are not a solution, but a form of displacement. They push people from one corner of the city to another without offering long-term alternatives. In Honolulu, where public spaces are limited and visibility is high, this cycle repeats again and again. Encampments may disappear from downtown streets for a few weeks, but they reappear in outlying areas near beaches, under highways, or in suburban neighborhoods. The problem does not vanish, it simply shifts location. Moreover, sweeps can erode trust between the homeless population and service providers. For individuals already wary of authority, the destruction of their shelters confirms a perception that the system is not there to help, but to punish. Outreach workers then face a harder task convincing people to seek shelter or treatment. This raises an important question: is the goal to hide homelessness from public view, or is it to actually end homelessness? In Honolulu, as in many other parts of the country, the heavy use of sweeps suggests that optics often take precedence over outcomes. For policymakers, the pressure to maintain a tourist-friendly image is immense. But for those living in the encampments, these sweeps mean a recurring cycle of trauma and instability. If Honolulu is to chart a different course, it must ask whether dignity and compassion can be placed at the center of its response. At the root of Honolulu's crisis lies a brutal economic truth. The cost of living in Hawaii is among the highest in the nation. Housing in particular is staggeringly expensive. The median home price hovers around $750 to $800, far beyond the reach of most working class families. Renters fare little better, with average monthly rents rising faster than wages. Beyond housing, the everyday costs of food, utilities, and transportation also weigh heavily. Hawaii's isolation means that goods are imported often at inflated prices. Groceries cost roughly 50% more than the national average. Electricity and fuel are similarly elevated. For those living paycheck to paycheck, even a small medical bill or job loss can push them over the edge into homelessness. This is why Honolulu's crisis cannot be separated from the broader economic conditions of Hawaii. Unlike some cities where homelessness may be primarily tied to substance use or mental illness in Honolulu, it is equally driven by affordability. Families with steady employment still find themselves living in cars because their wages cannot cover rent. Teachers, service workers, and even healthcare aides professions that hold communities together are sometimes priced out of stable housing. This reality highlights a painful paradox. While Honolulu thrives on tourism revenue with visitors spending billions annually, the workers who sustain that industry often cannot afford the homes surrounding the hotels they serve. Without aggressive investment in affordable housing, the gap between those who can live comfortably in Honolulu and those forced onto the streets will continue to widen. In truth, the affordability crisis is not unique to Hawaii. It is part of the larger challenge of being homeless in America. But in Honolulu, the intensity of the housing market makes the consequences especially stark. Local and state officials in Honolulu have not stood idle in the face of the crisis. In recent years, the city has experimented with a range of approaches from tiny home villages to kuhale communities, and from expanded shelter systems to permanent supportive housing, PSH. Each of these carries both promise and limitation, and the lessons learned elsewhere in the United States provide a roadmap for what Honolulu might achieve if it chooses wisely. Tiny homes, for instance, have been deployed quickly as an emergency measure. They offer privacy and security, a stepping stone away from the dangers of street life. Yet without reliable infrastructure such as running water, electricity, and sanitation, these sites risk becoming temporary fixes rather than sustainable solutions. Some Honolulu projects have faced operating costs exceeding $8,000 per resident each month, far higher than more comprehensive housing options. The lesson is clear: speed is valuable, but sustainability must not be ignored. The Kahole model, which builds small village-like communities, has shown greater promise. These settlements emphasize social connection and collective responsibility, offering residents not only shelter but also a renewed sense of belonging. Honolulu has committed to expanding Kahole sites, hoping to create alternatives that feel more like neighborhoods than institutions. Similar models in Oregon and California suggest that when residents are given ownership and community, the outcomes are far more stable. Still, permanent supportive housing remains the gold standard. By combining affordable housing with wraparound services like healthcare, mental health treatment, and addiction recovery, PSH tackles the root causes of chronic homelessness. The results from other cities are striking. In Seattle, for example, the introduction of large-scale PSH programs helped reduce chronic homelessness by nearly 30% over a 5-year period. The long-term savings in healthcare and law enforcement costs were substantial, far outweighing the upfront investment. Honolulu could take this lesson to heart-bold spending. Today could yield not only stability for thousands, but financial relief for the city in the long run. Despite these efforts, Honolulu faces significant obstacles: limited land, sky-high real estate prices, zoning restrictions, and community opposition. And while leaders speak with compassion, the continued reliance on encampment sweeps reveals a tension between words and action. The city now stands at a crossroads. Will it continue to lean on temporary high-cost interventions, or will it summon the political courage to commit fully to housing-first strategies? The decision will shape Honolulu's trajectory for decades. After 2 decades of studying homelessness in America, I look at Honolulu's crisis with both sorrow and urgency. I have walked through encampments where families share meals cooked over makeshift stoves, where elders sit beneath tarps trying to shield themselves from the rain, and where children bend over notebooks by the light of a small flashlight. These are not passing snapshots, they are daily realities for thousands of people. The question before us is not whether we can afford to respond, but whether we can afford not to. Every year of inaction drives the crisis deeper, raising costs for hospitals, law enforcement, and social services while eroding public trust. Honolulu's stunning beauty only sharpens the contrast, making the suffering all the more visible. Yet, that visibility also creates an opportunity, the chance to lead, to show that even a city dependent on tourism can embrace compassion and make bold investments in housing and healthcare. Still, caution is warranted. Too often, policies have been shaped to protect appearances rather than solve root problems. Clearing encampments to preserve the image of a clean city or building shelters without wraparound services are strategies of delay. They move people out of sight, but not out of crisis. Real progress requires courage to declare housing a basic right to build affordable units, even in affluent areas, and to see every homeless individual as a citizen, not a burden. And here the role of the community cannot be overstated. Programs and funding matter, but lasting change will come only when residents themselves embrace shared responsibility. Faith groups, neighborhood associations, schools, and local businesses all have the power to shift culture. When a city's people stand together demanding dignity and compassion for their neighbors, policy will follow. The challenge is awakening that collective duty before the crisis grows beyond repair. Conclusion. Honolulu's homelessness crisis is a stark reminder of America's broader struggle with poverty and displacement set against the backdrop of a paradise. Soaring housing costs, addiction, and systemic inequities fuel this tragedy, yet the resilience of communities like Pu'uhonua o Waianae shines through. Honolulu faces a choice: treat this as an urgent crisis or let it define the city's future. Real change demands housing-first solutions, affordable homes, and compassionate care. Homelessness is not inevitable, it's a problem we can solve. Visit www.hawaiihelps.org to support local efforts and join the fight for dignity and homes for all.